Hello, everyone out there in coronavirus quarantine land. I hope everyone is staying happy and safe and healthy and well. I'm Sam Zitin from St. Louis, NCSY, here with today's burst of inspiration for you. I wanted to share some thoughts I've been having based on some really interesting insights from Rabbi Akiva Tatz. Rabbi Akiva Tatz in various places talks. I've seen him in live here in St. Louis, as well as his book Living Inspired discusses a concept that I think gets a little bit short shrift and doesn't really get talked about the way it deserves to. He spends a lot of time talking about the concept of clarity and what it means to gain clarity. How ultimately the search of being a human, the goal of being a human, the goal of learning and growing and Torah and all of these things revolves around this idea of clarity, or at least it can be boiled down to that idea. And responding in the face of clarity or not is part of what makes us uniquely human. Beautiful insights on it. He spends a lot of time talking about it. Um, but it's a difficult concept. What does it really mean to gain clarity? He talks about it like this. He actually says something really mind-blowingly fascinating. He says that all human suffering, all of it, is fundamentally about lacking clarity. That if someone has perfect clarity, perfect understanding, then they're going to be okay, even if the situation isn't ideal. As an example, if you were standing by the street and the street were covered in broken glass that was on fire, but you knew with 100% clarity that your job in this world, your mission in life was something across that street, you'd get across that street. You'd find a way, you'd manage because you had clarity. When you introduce even a little bit of doubt, that actually becomes much more difficult. Do I really have to cross this street covered in broken glass on fire? It's a little maybe not so simple to do. I'm not sure I want to do that. Um, and it's a really good illustration of what it means to have Emunah in our world. We don't get to see Hashem day to day. Some people see more than others. We're supposed to look. We're supposed to recognize the Yad Hashem, Hashem's presence, and Hashgacha Pratis, and all of that going on in the world. But it's not obvious. We don't get open miracles like they had during the time of the temple. And it's difficult. It's a challenge. We're not specifically given clarity on those kinds of things. And Emunah is about our search and our job of trying to gain clarity on those things. It's interesting to me to think about it at this time of year that we're coming out of Purim, which is Chag Nes Nestar, the holiday of the hidden miracle, where Hashem's presence is specifically masked, moving into Pesach. Did I say? I said Purim, right? Yeah, Purim. Moving into Pesach, which is possibly the series of events that more than any other demonstrates Hashem's power over the world. That's fundamentally the purpose of the Makos, was for the entire world to see and recognize Hashem's power and sovereignty over the world. And it was obvious and clear that that was the case, and it became more so from the time we left Mitzrayim until we got to the Yam Suf and saw Kriyas Yam Suf, and then went to Har Sinai, and this entire process from the beginning of the Makos through Kriyas Yam Suf and all of the Nesim, the miracles that we experienced in the desert, leading up to Har Sinai, is this process by which Klal Yisrael went from this incredibly low level that we were on, the lowest level possible of Tuma, before we were about to become irredeemable, and we left Mitzrayim and went to Har Sinai. And in order to go through that process and be worthy of receiving the Torah, we went through this process that we became more and more and more clear and connected to understanding Hashem's power over the world. The Makos was part of that process. Kriyas Yam Suf was part of that process. Sustaining on the mun in the desert and all the miracles that we experienced leading up to Har Sinai, and ultimately Matan Torah of Har Sinai itself, was all part of that process. It was about gaining clarity on that. But every generation that we've gone on since then, that clarity has gotten further and further away from us. We no longer have the same kind of miracles and prophecy that they did back then. And our clarity and our understanding of Hashem is fundamentally different in today's world than it was back then. That's the time of year that we're in right now. We find ourselves in a very, very, very tricky and challenging time in history. In the history of the world, we've never experienced something quite like coronavirus. And I don't just mean the virus, because we've had viruses before, even viruses when some of you might remember SARS or MERS or anything like that, swine flu. But fundamentally, this is the first time that we're experiencing these things as a society, um, with the kind of infrastructure that we have now, with things like Netflix and YouTube and Zoom, um, Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all of these things to enable society to carry on in a much less interrupted manner than it might have even 10, 15 years ago. We have things like Amazon Prime and Instacart, ways of getting what you need without ever leaving your house. And we've got this incredible array of ways to entertain ourselves, to connect to other people. It's really quite remarkable, and yet we're finding it very difficult in many cases to do so. People are talking constantly about how they can't wait to get out. They're having to be told, no, you need to be social distancing. You really shouldn't go hang out with your friends. Even if you're staying 6 feet apart, don't do that. Don't go out unless it's absolutely necessary. Everyone needs to be sheltering in place. Stay at home. Blah, 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 blah. There's a lot. It's very challenging. It's very difficult. And a lot of us internalize those feelings, and we sort of recognize and understand off the bat why that's so difficult, but we can't necessarily put a name to it. It's hard. Doesn't make sense. It should be so easy. We've got every bit of entertainment ever recorded accessible at our fingertips on the internet. Um, we've got ways to occupy ourselves for months, years. I've got books stacked up yay high I haven't read that I would love to get to. I have construction projects that I would love to work on. All sorts of things. Why is it so hard for us to connect to this idea of just stay home for a little while? Everyone just needs to stay home for a little while, and then we can really start to move on, and hopefully very speedily in our time, please Hashem, this epidemic will cease. So why is it so hard? And I think fundamentally it comes back around to what we started talking about at the beginning. It's Rabbi Tatz's idea of clarity. If you knew someone, God forbid, some of you may, if you knew someone close to you who was tested positive for coronavirus, it probably wouldn't be so hard to not visit them for a couple of weeks, the 14 days or so that they would be in quarantine. You probably could manage. You'd say, you know what? They're tested positive for coronavirus. We'll chat on Zoom. We'll be okay. We'll text. I don't need to go see them today. But when someone hasn't, when we don't know, when there's doubt, that's when it gets hard. It's hard when you know that everyone's really supposed to stay at home because everyone needs to stay at home. If everyone doesn't stay at home, then we're not really working to try and end it. But you know what? I'm probably not sick. And my friend's probably not sick. And, well, the park, all the people there probably aren't sick. Do I really need to stay home? Does it really matter if I do? We lack that clarity. We have doubt. And so even when we've been told by our teachers, by our leaders, by our rabbis that the correct thing to do in these situations is no, stay at home. This is pikuach nefesh. This is life and death. We're not supposed to mess around with these things. You got to buckle down and take your time. That's very hard for people. And I think a lot of that difficulty is because we doubt that. We doubt. Is it really that big a deal if I go out? Is it? Is it not? Yeah. And that doubt, that lack of clarity is what makes it so difficult. We have this idea that's being talked about more and more that it doesn't matter if you're afraid of catching coronavirus. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're sick or aren't sick or you think you'll be fine. That as a society, the place we're at and what we need to do is that we all need to buckle down and say, you know what? It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be hard. But for a little bit, we all need to put everyone else's needs ahead of our own. And we need to have everyone's best interests in mind as a real responsibility that we all have. And fundamentally, that's the way it always is for us in Kol Yisrael. This is not a one-person show. It's not just you, and it's not just me, but we're all in this together. And if we understand that everything we do, everything we say is about way bigger things than just us, and we try and gain a little bit of clarity on what it is that we're really doing, what we're working for, and what we're working towards, then we have the chance for amazing things to come out of that. So I want to wish all of you a wonderful, happy, safe, healthy week. Have an amazing Shabbos. I hope everyone has an amazing Pesach and is successful with their preparation. And don't be afraid to reach out and say hi. Talk to everyone later.